You're listening to the Financial Source podcast on YouTube.
Welcome back to the Financial Source podcast. We are kicking off a really risk-heavy week where global markets feel like they're being torn in two different directions.
Oh, absolutely. On one hand, you have all this hard data coming out, but on the other, these geopolitical flashpoints are just escalating everywhere.
And right in the middle, you've got the US dollar just holding firm, kind of waiting. Everyone's got their eyes on Tuesday's non-farm payrolls report.
And at the same time, all this political intrigue is swirling around future Federal Reserve leadership, with President Trump suggesting rates should be, 1% or lower within a year?
It's a lot to take in. Let's unpack it.
Okay, so that political backdrop, we have to start there. Because it's not subtle anymore, is it? This feels like a direct attempt to influence monetary policy.
A very direct attempt. When President Trump starts naming people like Kevin Warsh or Kevin Hassett as potential Federal Reserve chairs,
The market hears that loud and clear.
right, they're seen as much more aligned with the White House's easing agenda. It sends a huge signal about where U.S. rates could be headed.
And then he throws out that number 1% or lower.
That specific number, it's just so dramatic. It goes way beyond what any of the current data would even begin to support.
It does. It basically forces the market to weigh two things against each other.
Political will versus institutional independence.
Exactly. And the real question for you, the listener, is which one do investors believe in more right now?
Do they think the current Federal Reserve leadership can hold the line? Or do they start pricing in this aggressive, politically driven easing cycle, no matter what the jobs data says on Tuesday?
It creates this deeply uncertain environment for the dollar. But what's so fascinating is that while the U.S. is tangled up in all this political noise, you have other major central banks on the verge of making, real tectonic shifts in policy.
You're talking about the Bank of Japan.
I am. We're seeing the Japanese yen firming up quite a bit. And the reason for that is all this optimism coming from inside Japan, specifically from the Tankan survey.
Okay, the Tankan survey. It's a huge piece of data for the Bank of Japan. For anyone who isn't tracking Japanese economics day to day, break down why this is the metric that matters so much right now.
Well, the Tankan is really the most comprehensive measure you can get of business confidence in Japan. It looks at capital expenditure plans, how optimistic companies are. And what it showed was that large manufacturers are at their most optimistic in 4 years.
And this isn't just sentiment. It's not just feelings.
No, not at all. This is about tangible domestic economic activity, the kind of activity you need to see to justify ending a multi-decade experiment with ultra-low interest rates.
So this survey gives the Bank of Japan the domestic cover it needs.
It's the cover they need to finally maybe inch toward that first rate hike in years.
And if we just zoom out for a second, Japan moving off of negative rates it's a foundational shift for global finance. It completely unwinds that massive carry trade where investors borrowed yen for practically nothing to fund investments everywhere else.
A huge deal. But let's contrast that, right?
Yeah.
You have this firmness in the end based on real domestic strength. And then you look at the commodity currencies. The Aussie and the New Zealand dollar, a much different story.
Much more disappointing one.
And that transition immediately makes us look at the global demand picture, and one country in particular.
Sure, yeah.
China. The softer than expected activity data that came out of there just hit those commodity currencies hard. Industrial output, retail sales, both missed expectations. It signals this sustained, gradual slowdown.
And it's a pretty straight line to draw from China's softness to the Australian and New Zealand economies. They're so leveraged to Chinese demand.
Highly leveraged. For raw materials, for tourism, you name it.
But the New Zealand dollar seemed to get hit even harder than the Aussie. What was the extra pressure there?
The extra pressure came from inside the house, so to speak. The Reserve Bank of New Zealand governor came out and specifically mentioned a slight probability of another rate cut in the near term.
So a double whammy for the Kiwi dollar.
It's exactly. Weakness from your biggest trading partner, China, combined with your own central bank talking about cutting rates.
That's a tough combination for any risk-sensitive currency.
It's exceptionally difficult.
And this global demand picture, it really forces the issue of trade into the spotlight. While the U.S. and China are in their own long-running conflict, we actually saw some surprisingly good news on the North American trade front.
We did. U.S.-Mexico tensions really eased up after they reached an agreement on that Rio Grande water dispute.
Which might sound like just a local environmental issue to some.
It might, But the market relief was something you could almost feel. It was palpable.
That's because resolving that water issue took a much bigger threat off the table. It removed the near-term threat of President Trump following through on his vow to impose a new 5% tariff on all Mexican goods.
A critical supply chain threat. Taking that off the table was a huge relief valve for cross-border manufacturing.
But that relief on one front it's kind of counterbalanced by the stalemate we see in other big deals.
Like the European Union-Mercosur trade deal. A massive, long-running negotiation.
Connecting two huge economic blocs. And yet,
France just reiterated that the conditions aren't in place for a vote.
which just kicks the can down the road again.
Again, it's pretty striking how persistent that resistance is.
And it'll always come down to French agricultural protectionism, doesn't it?
It often does. Decades of negotiation and a few powerful domestic lobbies can still bring it to a halt.
So from agricultural trade to the tech war, the pressure there between the U.S. and China is just relentless.
Absolutely. The White House's tech policy lead signaled this week that Beijing is highly unlikely to accept NVIDIA's new specialized AI chip.
The H200.
The H200, right.
So for our listeners, explain why this specific chip is so critical and why China is pushing back.
Well, the H200 is basically NVIDIA's attempt to thread the needle. It's designed to comply with U.S. export controls, so it has slightly less performance than their top-of-the-line chips.
But China sees that as the problem itself.
Precisely. They see it as a high-level dependency they are determined to get rid of. Their goal now is total semiconductor independence.
So this isn't just about trade balances anymore.
No, this is about strategic technology control. And Beijing would rather develop its own domestic alternatives than accept a deliberately, degraded product from the U.S.
And Europe is getting involved in this regulatory push as well, right? It's not just about high-tech components.
That's right. Europe is getting ready for a crackdown on unsafe Chinese consumer products, things sold on platforms like Alibaba and Shein.
So the conflict is broadening.
It's broadening from strategic tech to consumer safety, platform accountability. It shows the West is really starting to coordinate its regulatory response.
Okay, let's pivot to commodities, because this is where that geopolitical volatility has just hit so hard and so fast.
Crude oil especially, a significant unexpected lift.
And it's almost all driven by tensions in those critical supply corridors.
The most immediate trigger was Iran seizing a foreign tanker in the Gulf of Oman.
Smuggled diesel, I believe?
6 million liters of it, yeah. And the Gulf of Oman is a critical choke point right at the entrance to the Strait of Hormuz.
Through which a huge chunk of the world's oil transits.
So any incident there immediately adds a severe supply risk premium to the price. It threatens the entire global flow.
And this wasn't an isolated risk, was it?
Not at all. At the same time, we saw serious infrastructure attacks elsewhere. Ukraine reportedly struck Russian oil facilities in Krasnodar and Volgograd.
So the market is pricing in the reality that energy infrastructure as a target is back in focus.
It is. And across multiple theaters of conflict. It's supporting oil prices regardless of what you might think about demand from China.
And we also heard from Kuwait's oil minister.
We did, which gives us important context on the supply side. He said he was surprised by the recent price decline. And he suggested that a fair price right now is somewhere between $60 and $65 a barrel.
That range is a crucial insight, isn't it? It tells us what major OPEC plus producers see as their comfort zone.
It's their price floor. It supports their budgets. And it suggests that if prices dip below that, we should expect them to intervene on supply no matter what the global economy is doing.
Okay, so oil is higher on risk. What about the metals complex?
The metals are telling that softer Chinese demand story we talked about.
Gold managed a rebound, though.
It did. Gold, the classic safety asset, got back above $4,300 an ounce. It seems investors are prioritizing pure geopolitical hedging right now.
But copper, Dr. Copper? Not so much.
Copper is stabilizing only marginally. That rebound is really being capped by the persistent softness in Chinese industrial data.
So gold is reacting to tanks and ships.
And copper is reacting to factory orders. That's the perfect way to put it.
So let's drill down on these geopolitical flashpoints a bit more because they are so interconnected.
The Middle East is still incredibly charged. We saw an Israeli strike in Gaza that killed a senior Hamas commander, which just keeps tensions at a maximum.
And it's not just contained to Gaza. The risk is spreading.
It is. 2 U.S. soldiers and a U.S. interpreter were killed in Syria. The attacker is believed to be linked to Syrian security forces.
And an incident like that immediately elevates the U.S. military posture in the region.
It does. President Trump has already vowed retaliation against ISIS, so a forceful U.S. response could be coming. At the same time, you have CENTCOM, the U.S. Central Command, planning a conference in Doha to talk about an international stabilization force for Gaza. It just shows you the long-term complexity here.
It's not just one front. And the Russia-Ukraine conflict, that continues to impact global markets, especially around the Black Sea.
Absolutely. Ukraine is dealing with severe infrastructure damage, and President Zelensky is starting to signal that any upcoming peace proposals are going to require some painful compromises.
But tactically, the conflict is still very active.
Very. And a direct hit over the weekend serves as a reminder. A Russian drone attack damaged a Turkish civilian vessel.
Carrying sunflower oil.
Sunflower oil, yeah. A direct reminder that the risk to agricultural and energy transport through that region has not gone away. It's a direct threat to global food supply chains.
We're also seeing these shifting alliances and friction points pop up elsewhere, in Southeast Asia, for instance.
The Philippine Coast Guard reported Chinese ships injuring 3 Filipino fishermen with high-pressure water cannons.
That's the sort of low-level but high-tension escalation that just ratchets up regional instability.
It does. And then you see China sanctioning a former Japanese self-defense forces chief. That happens just as Tokyo is preparing to send more assistance to Ukraine and tighten its security alliances with the U.S. It shows how these conflicts are all becoming connected.
So when you add all of this up, the policy shifts, the trade friction, the energy attacks, the direct escalations, what does it mean for risk sentiment heading into the week?
The mood is just exceptionally fragile. We saw the NASDAQ leading declines late last week, weak AI-linked earnings from Broadcom, some concerns about Oracle.
And that tech-led pullback weighed on everything.
It weighed on the broader U.S. indices. It spilled into APAC trading. It just reinforces a really cautious stance from investors.
And yet European equities are showing a little bit of a divergence. Futures are pointing to a slightly stronger start there.
It seems they're temporarily focusing on some relative value, perhaps, compared to the U.S. tech sector. But I think the overall takeaway has to be that the market is being pulled in so many directions at once.
It's a real balancing act.
It is. You have the dollar waiting on jobs data while politicians are calling for specific rate cuts. You have the yen pricing in a historic policy shift. You have oil reacting to a tanker seizure.
And commodity currencies getting dragged down by China. It has never felt more complex.
It hasn't. And I think the ultimate lesson for you as you're sorting through all of this is that in an environment this saturated with risk, institutional credibility becomes the most volatile commodity of all.
That's a great point.
The market can price in a tanker seizure overnight. That's easy. But pricing in the slow erosion of a central bank's independence, that's a much more insidious risk that demands constant attention.
That concludes our rundown of the key market drivers, balancing geopolitical risk against a heavy schedule of central bank decisions and economic events for the start of this crucial week.
Appreciate you tuning in for this market update analysis. Join us again on the Financial Source podcast as we continue to track these complex global forces.